When the cold pierced through every joint in my bones, I called my only son for help. His response was brief. No time. Dress warmer. In that moment, I understood clearly. The bond between mother and child doesn't die from a heated argument, but from a single indifferent sentence. Those 3 words echoed through my freezing house, colder than the winter wind rattling my windows. After decades of sacrifice, of choosing him over myself, I finally saw what I had become to him, an inconvenience, a burden to be dismissed with the casual cruelty of someone who has forgotten what love costs. My name is Margaret Ellis, and at 68 years old, I thought I understood the depths of winter, but nothing, not the blizzards that buried our small Midwestern town, not the ice storms that knocked power lines like dominoes, prepared me for the cold that settled into my bones that February night when my furnace died. It started with a grinding sound around 11:30 p.m., like metal teeth gnashing against each other. Then silence, the kind of silence that announces something vital has broken. Within minutes, the warmth began bleeding from my house, seeping through the walls like a ghost abandoning its haunt. I wrapped myself in the quilt my mother had sewn 40 years ago, but fabric can't hold heat that isn't there. My fingers, already stiff with arthritis, fumbled with my phone. David's number sat at the top of my recent calls, not because we spoke often, but because I'd tried reaching him on his birthday last week. He hadn't answered then either. This time, he picked up on the 4th ring. Music pounded in the background, voices layered over each other in that particular pitch of office celebration. "Mom, what is it?" His voice carried that edge of impatience I'd grown accustomed to, the tone reserved for telemarketers and inconveniences. "David, honey, my furnace just died. The house is freezing. Could you come over, maybe bring a space heater, or—" "I'm busy, Mom." The words came fast, practiced. "Can't it wait until morning? It's below 20 degrees outside. The house is already—" "Look, I'm at a work thing. Important clients, just dress warmer, okay? Layer up. Call a repair guy in the morning." "David, please, I wouldn't call if—" "No time. Dress warmer." The line went dead. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. The grandfather clock in the hallway, the one David used to hide behind during thunderstorms, ticked steadily, counting out the seconds of my new understanding. Each tick seemed to echo his words. No time, no time, no time. The cold crept higher, from my toes to my knees, settling in my hip joints like ground glass. I pulled another blanket from the closet, then another, creating a fortress of fabric that couldn't fight physics. My breath began to fog in my own living room, little clouds of proof that I was still alive, still breathing, even if I'd become invisible to the one person I'd given everything to raise. Through the frost-etched window, I could see the McAllister's house, every window glowing warm yellow against the darkness. Normal people living normal lives, with working furnaces, and I imagined children who answered their calls. The contrast made my chest tight with something sharper than cold. I picked up my phone again, scrolled past David's name to the emergency repair services. Each one I called gave the same answer, backed up until morning, maybe afternoon. The storm had knocked out furnaces across 3 counties. I was just another name on a very long list, but I wasn't just another name to David, or at least I hadn't thought I was. The house groaned around me, wood contracting in the cold, making sounds like footsteps on the stairs. Ghost steps of a younger David, running to show me his report card, his scraped knee, his first heartbreak. When had those footsteps stopped? When had I become someone he couldn't spare 20 minutes for on a freezing night? No time. Dress warmer. 5 words that rewrote 25 years of history. 5 words that crystallized every unreturned call, every missed lunch, every birthday card signed by his secretary. I'd made excuses for all of it. He was busy, successful, important, but busy people make time for what matters. And I, apparently, no longer mattered. The cold had reached my chest now, making each breath feel like swallowing ice. But there was something else growing inside me, something that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was clarity, sharp and brutal as the winter wind. For the first time in 68 years, I saw myself not as a mother, not as someone needed or necessary, but as an old woman sitting alone in a freezing house, abandoned by the person she'd built her entire life around. And in that moment of perfect, frozen clarity, I made a decision that would change everything. The cold house became a time machine, pulling me backward through memories I'd carefully folded away. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was 23 again, standing in the kitchen of our first apartment. David's father's funeral program still crisp in my pocket. The baby, my David, screamed in his high chair while I tried to figure out how to stretch $20 across a week of groceries. No time to grieve, no time to fall apart, just survive, one day bleeding into the next. I remembered the weight of him on my hip as I waited tables at the diner. My manager looking the other way when I brought him to work because babysitters cost more than I made in tips. His little fingers would grab at my hair while I balanced plates, and customers would coo over him, sometimes leaving an extra $1 for the hard-working mama. Those dollars added up to his school shoes, his winter coat, the graphing calculator he needed for advanced math. The radiator clanged once, a death rattle of the heating system, pulling me back to the present. But the memories wouldn't stop flowing. There was the Christmas when I'd worked 3 straight shifts to buy him the bike he'd circled in the catalog. My feet were so swollen I had to cut my shoes open. But his face that morning, God, that face. He'd hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack, whispering, "You're the best mom ever," into my ear like a prayer. When had those hugs stopped? I saw myself at 35, hair pulled back in the same ponytail for the 3rd day straight, studying for my GED at the kitchen table while David did his homework beside me. "We're both students now," I'd told him, and he'd grinned, proud to share something with me. I'd finally gotten that diploma the same year he started high school, but I'd missed his freshman orientation because someone called in sick at my second job. "It's okay, Mom," he'd said then. "I know you're doing it for us." Us. When had us become you and me? The memories came faster now, a slideshow of sacrifices that had felt like privileges at the time. The man from my book club who'd asked me to dinner, turned down because David had a science fair. The community college courses abandoned when David needed braces. The promotion to shift manager that would have meant nights away from home, rejected without a second thought. My life had been a series of choices, and I'd chosen David every single time. I pulled the blankets tighter, but they couldn't warm the chill of recognition. Somewhere between his college graduation and his 3rd promotion, I'd become scenery in his life. Background noise, the woman who called too much, asked too many questions, reminded him of a past he seemed eager to forget. Last Thanksgiving, he'd promised to come but called an hour after the turkey was done. "Julia's parents really want us there," he'd said, as if I wasn't a parent, as if my want meant less. I'd eaten alone, saving the leftovers he'd never come to claim. His wedding invitation had arrived late, so late I'd wondered if it was intentional. Seated in the back row, I'd watched my son promise to put someone else first, to cherish and protect them. The words I'd lived by, unspoken for 25 years. During the reception, I'd overheard Julia's aunt whisper, "Is that really his mother? They seem so distant." Distant? As if I'd chosen this space between us, as if I'd carefully cultivated this garden of neglect, the baby shower invitation that never came. The first day of school photos of my grandson posted on Facebook, where I saw them alongside hundreds of strangers. The casual cruelty of being excluded from moments I'd once imagined sharing. No time, dress warmer. Those words weren't just about tonight. They were the summary of what I'd become. An obligation to be managed, a problem to be minimized. All those years of choosing him. And this was my receipt. I stood up, joints protesting, and walked to the mantel where his photos stood like sentinels. David at 5, gap-toothed and grinning, David at 18. Graduation cap askew, David at 30, arm around Julia, both of them looking away from the camera, towards some future that didn't include me. My fingers traced his young face in the oldest photo. That little boy who'd needed me so desperately, who'd clung to my legs at the grocery store and fell asleep in my arms every night until he was 8. Where had he gone? When had the child who brought me dandelions turned into the man who couldn't bring me 20 minutes? The truth settled over me like snow. I hadn't lost him tonight. I'd been losing him for years, one unreturned call at a time. Tonight was just the moment I finally admitted it, and with that admission came something unexpected. Not rage, not despair, but a strange, cold freedom. If I meant so little to him now, after everything, then perhaps it was time to stop pretending otherwise. Perhaps it was time to choose myself. The walk to the McAllisters' front door felt like crossing a frozen ocean. Each step crunched through the snow. My slippers, I hadn't even thought to change them, soaking through immediately. My pride fought me the entire way. Margaret Ellis didn't ask for help. Margaret Ellis managed on her own. But Margaret Ellis was also about to become a hypothermia statistic if she didn't swallow what was left of her dignity. My knuckles, blue-white with cold, barely made a sound against their door. For a moment, I considered turning back, choosing the familiar freeze of my own home over the humiliation of begging warmth from near strangers. Then the door swung open, and Tom McAllister's face transformed from confusion to alarm in an instant. "Margaret? My God, come in! Come in!" He practically pulled me across the threshold. Helen, come quick!" The warmth hit me like a physical force. My body began shaking violently, the heat triggering tremors I'd been too numb to feel. Helen appeared, took one look at me, and transformed into a force of nature. "Tom, get the kettle on. The thick blanket from the closet. No, 2 blankets. Margaret, honey, sit right here by the radiator." Her hands guided me to their plush armchair, the one I'd admired through their window on my evening walks. "What on earth happened? Furnace?" I managed through chattering teeth. "Died. I'm sorry to bother. Don't you dare apologize." Helen wrapped the first blanket around my shoulders, then the second. The weight of them felt like being held. "Tom had his brother over last month when their heat went out. Middle of the night, too. That's what neighbors do." Neighbors. Not family. Neighbors. Tom pressed a mug of tea into my hands. The ceramic burned against my frozen palms, but I held on anyway, desperate for the heat. They didn't ask why I was alone, didn't ask about David. Maybe they already knew. Small towns have eyes, and the absence of a son is as visible as his presence would be. "You'll stay here tonight," Helen announced, brooking no argument. "The guest room is already made up. I couldn't—" "You could, and you will." Tom's voice was gentle but firm. "We've got plenty of room, and I'm not sending you back to a frozen house." They bustled around me, adding sugar to my tea without asking, bringing slippers that had been warming by their own heating vent. Helen disappeared and returned with a hot water bottle, tucking it against my side like she'd done this 100 times before. Maybe she had. Maybe this was what people did for each other when they cared. "Thank you," I whispered, and meant more than just the tea. The blankets, the shelter. Thank you for not making me explain. Thank you for not judging. Thank you for showing me what help looks like when it's freely given. "Our Sandra lives in Seattle now," Helen said, settling into the chair across from me. "Calls every Sunday, but it's not the same as having her close. I understand, the quiet." She did understand, but Sandra called every Sunday. "David's very successful," I heard myself say, the automatic defense of a mother who'd spent years making excuses. "He's busy with—" "I'm sure he is." Helen's tone was carefully neutral, but her eyes were knowing. Still, on a night like this. On a night like this, strangers opened their door. On a night like this, neighbors became saviors. On a night like this, the people who owed me nothing gave me everything, while the one who owed me everything gave me nothing. Tom excused himself to call the furnace repair company. "My cousin owns it. He'll bump you to the top of the list," while Helen sat with me, not filling the silence with chatter, just being present. The grandfather clock in their hallway chimed 1 a.m., and I realized I'd been shivering on their doorstep just 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes to restore my faith in human kindness. 25 years to lose faith in my own child. You raised him alone, didn't you? Helen asked softly. I remember seeing you at the bus stop. Mornings, always just the two of you. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. That's the hardest thing, she continued, staring into her own tea. Giving them everything and watching them walk away with it, like you were just the launching pad, not the rocket. The tears came then, hot and sudden. Not for the cold, not for the broken furnace, but for the broken fiction I'd been maintaining. Helen reached over and squeezed my hand, her touch worth more than all the birthday cards David hadn't sent. You stay as long as you need, she said. Tonight, tomorrow, however long it takes to get your heat fixed. And Margaret, this doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. But as I sat in their warm living room, wrapped in the kindness of people who barely knew me, a different kind of heat began building in my chest. Not the warmth of gratitude, though that was there too, but something harder, more focused. If strangers could show me such care, such immediate and unquestioning support, what did it say about my son's refusal? No time, dress warmer. The words had become a mantra, but now they took on new meaning. No time for me meant all the time for others. Dress warmer meant figure it out yourself, and I would, but not in the way he expected. Tomorrow, I decided, sipping Helen's perfectly sweetened tea, I would make some calls of my own, not for help, not for warmth, but for something much more permanent. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of matching David's indifference with action. Tonight, though, I would accept the grace of strangers and sleep in a warm bed, dreaming of a future where the people in my life matched the love they received with the love they gave. The house felt different when I returned the next afternoon. Furnace, humming with new life. Tom's cousin had worked a miracle, arriving at 7 a.m. with apologies for the delay. But it wasn't the warmth that made everything feel foreign. It was my perspective. Each room held evidence of my devotion, like exhibits in a museum of one-sided love. I stood in the kitchen, running my fingers along the counter where I'd rolled out thousands of meals. The corner still bore the burn mark from when David tried to make me breakfast at age 7. I'd never refinished it, keeping that scar like a trophy. Now it seemed pathetic, clinging to proof that he'd once cared enough to try. My phone sat silent on the table. No missed calls. No texts asking if I'd survived the night. In 24 hours, my only child hadn't wondered once whether his mother had frozen to death. The absence of concern was louder than any argument we'd never had. I opened the message thread between us, scrolling back through months of monologue. My texts ran down the screen in blue bubbles. How was your day? Thinking of you. Would love to catch up. Miss you. His responses, when they came at all, were gray pebbles thrown across an ocean of my trying. Busy. Maybe later. K. The last time he'd initiated contact was 3 months ago, asking for his birth certificate for some financial form. I'd driven it to his office that same day, hoping to see him. His secretary had taken the envelope with a practiced smile. He's in a meeting, she'd said, though I could see him through the glass, laughing with colleagues over coffee. I moved to the living room, where photo albums lined the bottom shelf, pulling one out. I flipped through pages of birthday parties, school plays, Little League games. In every picture, I stood on the sidelines, camera in hand, documenting a life I was funding but rarely featured in. When had I become the photographer instead of part of the photo? There, a shot from his college graduation. I'd driven 12 hours overnight to be there, worked doubles for months to afford the hotel. In the picture, he's surrounded by friends. Julia already at his side. I'm somewhere behind the camera, as always. That night, he'd gone to celebrate with his roommates. You understand, right, Mom? It's a young people thing. I understood. I'd been understanding his whole life. The albums went back on the shelf, but I pulled out my laptop instead. The emails told their own story. Forwarded graduation announcements where other parents gushed about their pride, their joy, their children's acknowledgement of their sacrifices. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for everything. I couldn't have done it without you. This degree belongs to all of us. David's speech hadn't mentioned me at all. I found the folder labeled David's School, filled with report cards I'd saved, test papers he'd aced, certificates of achievement. Each one represented hours of my life, driving to tutoring, checking homework, fighting with the school board for advanced placement programs. I'd been so proud of building him into something special. I'd never asked what I was building him to become. The draft of my will sat in the desk drawer, last updated 5 years ago, everything to David. Of course, the house he'd grown up in, the savings I'd scraped together, the few pieces of jewelry from his grandmother, all waiting for someone who couldn't wait 20 minutes for me. If you're not part of my present, I said aloud to the empty room, testing the words like a foreign language, then you don't deserve my future. The decision crystallized with startling clarity. This wasn't about revenge, it was about recognition. All my life, I'd poured myself into a vessel that had no bottom. Every drop of love, sacrifice, and devotion had fallen straight through. It was time to stop pouring. I pulled out my phone and searched for estate lawyers. Janet Monroe's name appeared at the top, with reviews praising her discretion and professionalism. I dialed before I could talk myself out of it. "I'd like to make an appointment," I said when her secretary answered. "As soon as possible. I need to make some significant changes to my will. We have an opening tomorrow at 2 p.m. May I ask the nature of the changes? I'm removing my son as beneficiary." The words came out steady. "Sure, all of it, everything." If the secretary found this unusual, her voice didn't betray it. "We'll have the preliminary paperwork ready. Please bring any existing documents." After hanging up, I walked to the window. The McAllisters were in their yard, Tom helping Helen with some winter gardening project. They worked in easy synchronization, decades of partnership evident in their movements. When Helen slipped on ice, Tom caught her, both of them laughing. They'd shown me more care in one night than David had in years. My reflection in the window showed a woman I barely recognized, not the devoted mother, not the waiting parent, but someone else. Someone who understood that love shouldn't be a one-way street. Someone who finally grasped that giving everything to someone who gives nothing back isn't noble. It's just foolish. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., I would make it official. But the real change had already happened. Somewhere between no time and dress warmer, the son I'd raised had made his choice. Now it was time to make mine. I turned away from the window and headed to the kitchen. For the first time in years, I would cook dinner for one without feeling lonely. The extra portions that I always made, just in case David stops by, would stay unmade. The empty chair across from me would be just furniture, not a symbol of failure. This was what choosing myself looked like: quiet, deliberate, and long overdue. Janet Monroe's office smelled of leather books and expensive coffee, a combination that suggested both tradition and efficiency. She was younger than I'd expected, perhaps mid-40s, with sharp eyes that had probably seen every family drama imaginable. Her handshake was firm, professional, and somehow reassuring. "Mrs. Ellis," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her mahogany desk, "you mentioned significant changes to your estate planning." "Yes." I placed my folder on the desk, hands steady. "I need to remove my son as beneficiary. Completely." She didn't blink, didn't offer platitudes about family reconciliation. "And who would you like to designate instead?" "Tom and Helen McAllister." I pulled out a paper where I'd written their full names and address. "They're my neighbors. I'd like everything to go to them." Janet made notes in elegant handwriting. "House, savings, personal effects, everything? Everything. May I ask?" She paused, choosing words carefully. "Is this a temporary decision based on a recent conflict, or have you given this considerable thought?" I thought of the cold seeping through my bones, the silence after David hung up, the warmth of strangers who owed me nothing. "This isn't about one night, Miss Monroe. It's about recognizing a pattern I've ignored for too long." She nodded, pulling out forms. "I'll need to ask some standard questions. Do you have any other children?" "No." "Any dependents?" "No." And you're making this decision of your own free will, without coercion. The only person who's coerced me is myself, into believing things would change. The honesty surprised me. I'm done waiting. Janet's expression softened slightly. I see this more often than you'd think. Parents who give everything and receive nothing. It's not vindictive to protect yourself from further hurt. As she prepared the documents, she explained each element. The house David had grown up in, where his height marks still climbed the kitchen doorframe, to the McAllisters. The savings account I'd built through decades of double shifts, to the McAllisters. The family photos, the grandmother's ring David had never asked about, the car he'd learned to drive in, all to the neighbors who'd opened their door on a freezing night. I'll need you to initial here, and here, Janet indicated, and sign here. The pen felt heavier than it should. This was it. The moment where I stopped being the mother who gave everything and became the woman who chose herself. My signature flowed across the line, steady and sure. There's one more thing, I said. I'd like to include a letter, not to David, to the McAllisters, explaining why. Of course, you can draft that and bring it in, or I'd like to write it now, if that's okay. She provided elegant stationery, and I wrote in my careful script, Dear Tom and Helen, by the time you read this, I'll be gone, and you'll be wondering why strangers inherited everything I owned. The answer is simple. You weren't strangers when it mattered. On the coldest night of my life, and I don't mean the temperature, you opened your door without question. You gave warmth, shelter, and dignity to someone who had nowhere else to turn. You showed me what family really means, showing up. My son chose to be absent from my life long before I chose to be absent from his future. This isn't revenge. It's recognition. You demonstrated more love in one night than he has in years. Use the house well. The kitchen gets wonderful morning light. The garden needs tending but rewards the effort. Be happy there. With all my gratitude, Margaret Ellis. I folded the letter carefully, handed it to Janet. She placed it in the file with the reverence it deserved. This will be ready for final signing next week, she said. I'll call when... No need to call. I stood, smoothing my skirt. I'll come by Thursday at the same time. Walking out of her office, I felt lighter. Not happy, exactly. You don't feel happy about admitting your only child doesn't love you, but free. Free from the weight of pretending, from the burden of one-sided devotion, from the fiction that blood means more than behavior. In the parking lot, my phone buzzed. David's name appeared, and for a moment my heart lurched with the old hope. Maybe he'd realized. Maybe he'd worried. Maybe... The text was brief. Mom, Julia needs your banana bread recipe for a work thing. Can you send it? Not are you okay? Not sorry about the other night? Not even how are you? Just another request, another taking, another reminder that I existed only when useful. I deleted the message without responding. Let Julia figure out her own banana bread. I was done being the repository of convenient favors. The backup plan. The forgotten until needed mother, driving home. I passed the McAllisters' house. Helen was checking her mailbox, and she waved. I waved back, knowing that someday, when I was gone, she'd stand in my kitchen, maybe making her own memories in the space where I'd made mine. The thought didn't sadden me. It felt right, like correcting a cosmic error. The will was just paper and ink, but what it represented was revolutionary, the radical act of giving love where love was given, of recognizing family where family behavior existed. David had made his choice every day for years, with every unreturned call, every excuse, every no time. Now I'd made mine, and unlike his, mine was written in ink, filed in law, and protected from the manipulation of too late regrets. The pen that signed those papers was mightier than 25 years of misplaced devotion at home. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the world turn white with fresh snow. Somewhere across town, my son was living his life, oblivious to the shift in his future. That was okay. He'd been oblivious to me for years. The only difference now was that I was finally paying attention. The silence lasted exactly 4 days. I'd settled into it like a warm bath. The absence of expectation more comfortable than I'd imagined. No more checking my phone every hour. No more crafting texts designed to seem casual but invite response. No more waiting. Just blessed, peaceful silence. Then Thursday morning at 8:15 a.m., my phone erupted. David's ringtone. I hadn't changed it, hadn't gotten that far yet, shattered the quiet. I let it ring through to voicemail. Within seconds, he called again. Then again, the text started next. "Mom, what's going on? Why aren't you answering? This is ridiculous. Call me back now." I sipped my coffee, watching the messages accumulate like snow on a windowsill. Somehow, he'd found out. Small towns have their ways. Perhaps someone at Janet's office. Perhaps the bank where I'd updated beneficiaries. It didn't matter how. What mattered was the sudden urgency from someone who'd had no time just days ago. By noon, the tone shifted. "Mom, we need to talk about this. You're overreacting. Just because of one bad night? This is insane. I'm your son." That last one almost made me laugh. He was my son when inheritance was at stake. Where was that certainty when I was freezing? At 3:45 p.m., his car pulled into my driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as he sat there for a full minute. Probably strategizing. David had always been good at strategy. It's what made him successful. Calculate the approach, maximize the outcome. I wondered what angle he'd chosen. The doorbell rang, then rang again. Then the pounding started. "Mom, open the door. I know you're in there." I remained at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold, crossword puzzle half finished, 7 across, abandonment, 8 letters, starting with D. "This is crazy." His voice carried through the door. "You can't just cut me out. One misunderstanding and you throw away everything." Misunderstanding, as if I'd misunderstood. No time, dress warmer. His voice softened. Shifting tactics. "Mom, please, let's talk about this. I'm sorry about the other night. I didn't realize how cold it was. I should have come over." The words were right, but the timing was wrong. Apologies offered only when money was at stake weren't apologies. They were negotiations. "I'll call every day," he bargained with the closed door. "Visit every weekend, whatever you want, just open the door." Whatever I wanted. 25 years of wanting. And now, he offered everything. Strange how the possibility of losing an inheritance could suddenly create so much available time. He kept at it for 20 minutes. Anger, bargaining, guilt, more anger. The whole cycle of someone realizing too late that their safety net had been cut. Finally, I heard his car door slam, the engine rev with frustration. But I knew he'd be back. David didn't give up when something he wanted was at stake. He just never wanted me. The calls continued through the evening. I turned off the ringer but watched the screen light up repeatedly. Julia called twice. The first time she'd ever called me directly. Even she understood the stakes now. Friday brought a new strategy. Flowers appeared on my doorstep at 9 a.m. Expensive ones, the kind he'd never sent for my birthdays. The card read, "I'm sorry. Love, David. Love." How easily that word appeared when accompanied by financial motivation. Then came the email. Formal, like a business proposal. "Mother, I understand you're upset about the recent incident. I take full responsibility for my insensitive response to your heating emergency. However, disinheriting your only child seems an extreme reaction to a single lapse in judgment. I've been reflecting on our relationship and realize I haven't been as present as I should be. I'm prepared to make immediate changes. Weekly dinners, daily check-in calls, including you in all family events, monthly financial support for your expenses. Please reconsider this drastic decision. Family should forgive family. David. Family should forgive family, but first, family should act like family." I printed the email, tucked it into my purse. It would make good evidence if he contested the will, proof that he only valued me when I had something to give. Saturday's mail brought a letter from Julia, handwritten on her personal stationery. She spoke of family traditions, the importance of grandmothers, how she'd always wanted us to be closer. Every word reeked of David's coaching. By Sunday, he'd recruited reinforcements. His colleague called, mentioning what a devoted son David was, how he talked about me constantly, lies wrapped in desperation. Then came Pastor Williams, who I hadn't seen since David's confirmation, suddenly concerned about my spiritual well-being and the importance of forgiveness. But the most telling moment came Sunday evening. Another text from David. "This is destroying Julia. She's been crying all day, worried about our family falling apart. Is this what you want, to hurt innocent people?" There it was. The manipulation laid bare, using his wife's tears as currency, weaponizing emotion he'd never shown himself. The man who couldn't spare 20 minutes from my freezing night suddenly had all the time in the world for orchestrating a campaign. I pulled out my laptop and typed a single response to his email. "David, your sudden interest in our relationship, coinciding precisely with changes to my will, speaks louder than any apology. You've shown me who you are through years of actions, not words. I'm simply responding accordingly. The house is warm now. I've learned to dress appropriately." Margaret, I hit send before I could reconsider, then blocked his number, Julia's, and anyone else who might serve as his proxy. The silence returned, but different now. Not the silence of waiting, but the silence of choice. Tomorrow. I would return to Janet's office and finalize everything, let him pound on doors that wouldn't open, send flowers that wouldn't soften, make promises that came too late. I'd spent 25 years knocking on the door of his heart. Now he could learn how it felt to find no one home. The evening grew cold again, but my house stayed warm. I wrapped myself in one of the blankets Helen had given me that night. She'd insisted I keep it. It smelled faintly of lavender and kindness, worth more than all of David's too-late roses. Change, I realized, wasn't just about the will. It was about finally understanding that some people only love you when you're useful, and that's not love at all. It's just greed wearing a familiar face. The second Thursday arrived with an unseasonable warmth, as if nature itself had decided to mark the occasion. I'd signed the final papers that morning, Janet's steady presence making the irrevocable feel manageable. Now, at 4:30 p.m. I sat by my front window with a cup of chamomile tea, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. David's car pulled up slowly this time. No rushed arrival, no slamming doors. He'd abandoned the desperate energy of the past week for something more calculated. When he stepped out, I noticed he'd dressed carefully, the sweater I'd given him 3 Christmases ago, the watch from his college graduation, props in a performance. He didn't ring the bell, just stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, looking at the door as if it might open by force of will. When he finally knocked, it was soft, almost hesitant. "Mom?" His voice carried none of the earlier anger. "I know you're there. I'm not here to yell or argue. Can we talk, please?" I rose from my chair, moved to the door, but didn't open it. Some conversations didn't need face-to-face proximity. "We can talk like this," I said through the wood. A pause. I heard him shift, probably leaning closer. "That's fine. That's okay." Silence stretched between us, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, he broke it. "Is it really done? The will?" "Yes. Everything. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, stripped of strategy. "So that's it? 25 years and you just erase me?" "You erased me first. David, I'm just making it mutual. Because of one night? Because I couldn't drop everything. Stop." My voice came out harder than intended. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is about one night. We both know better." I heard him sink down, probably sitting on the porch steps, the boy who used to wait there for the school bus, lunchbox clutched in his small hands. "When did you become so cold out?" he asked. The question almost made me laugh. "Wednesday, February 12th, at approximately 11:45 p.m., the exact moment you told me to dress warmer. I didn't mean..." "Yes, you did. You meant exactly what you said. No time for me. Handle it yourself. That's been your message for years. I just finally heard it clearly. You're punishing me." "No." I pressed my palm against the door, feeling its solid presence. "I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." "From your own son? from someone who only remembers I exist when he needs something. The banana bread recipe, the birth certificate, now the inheritance. Tell me, David, when was the last time you called just to hear my voice? Silence. When was the last time you visited without an agenda? More silence. When did you last say, I love you, without wanting something in return? The quiet stretched so long I wondered if he'd left, then barely audible. I don't know. Neither do I, and that's the problem. I heard him stand, pace a few steps. So what am I supposed to do now? How do I fix this? Some things break beyond fixing. Sometimes all you can do is accept the pieces. You're really giving everything to the neighbors? People you barely know? People who answered their door at midnight? People who gave without being asked? People who showed up? Each word deliberate, each point precise. They're more family to me than, don't, his voice cracked. Don't say it. But I did. Then you are. The words hung in the air like ice crystals, beautiful and sharp. I heard him make a sound, not quite sob, not quite laugh, the noise of someone realizing they'd gambled and lost. I was going to take care of you, he said finally, eventually, when you really needed it. I really needed it that night, and 100 nights before, but you were waiting for eventually while I was living in now. So that's it. No second chances? No forgiveness? I forgave you years ago, David. I forgave every missed call, every broken promise, every empty holiday. But forgiving doesn't mean accepting more of the same. I'm done being the only one who tries. He kicked something. A rock. Maybe. The old porch floorboards creaked under his weight. Julia thinks I should contest it. Says no judge would uphold this. She's welcome to try. My voice stayed steady, calm. I have years of unanswered texts, declined invitations, your email specifically outlining all the ways you haven't been present. Any judge would see a pattern of abandonment. Abandonment? I didn't abandon you. No, you just left me to freeze while you partied. You just forgot I existed unless you needed something. You just treated me like an obligation instead of a mother. You're right, that's not abandonment. It's worse. It's indifference. I heard him walking away, then back, pacing like a caged animal. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? I'm sorry. That I'll change? I'll change? What words do you need to hear? That's just it. David, I don't need to hear anything anymore. I needed actions, not words, presence, not promises. And now I need nothing from you at all. The finality of it seemed to hit him physically. I heard him lean against the door, his voice closed now. I'm still your son. Biology doesn't make you my son. Love does, care does, showing up does. You're the child I gave birth to, raised, sacrificed everything for. But being my son, that's something you stopped doing a long time ago. Mom, goodbye, David. I walked away from the door, his voice calling after me, muffled by wood and distance and decision. In the kitchen, I poured fresh tea with steady hands, added honey, stirred counterclockwise like my mother taught me. Outside, I heard his car door slam, the engine start, the sound of tires on gravel growing faint. The house settled into quiet again, but it felt different now. Not the quiet of waiting, not the quiet of loneliness, but the quiet of resolution. I'd said what needed saying, done what needed doing. The rest was just time passing. At the kitchen table, I opened my crossword again. 7 across, abandonment, 8 letters. Starting with D. I filled in the answer with sure strokes. Deserved. The snow had returned by evening, soft flakes drifting past my window like ash from a distant fire. I sat in my reading chair, the one David used to curl up in as a child, watching the world turn white and clean. The house hummed with warmth, the new furnace working perfectly, a reliable presence that asked nothing but gave everything. On the side table. My phone lay silent. No more calls, no more texts, no more desperate bargaining. The finality of that last conversation had closed a door I'd been holding open for 25 years. My hand was tired from the effort. It felt good to let go. I pulled the old quilt tighter around my shoulders, not from cold, but from comfort. This was what peace felt like, not the absence of conflict, but the presence of resolution. Every choice had been made, every word spoken, every bridge burned with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Through the window, I caught sight of the McAllisters' porch light, glowing warm against the darkness. Helen had brought soup earlier. "Just checking in," she'd said, though we both knew it was more than that. She'd seen David's car, noticed his absence since small-town telegraph working overtime. But she hadn't asked questions, just squeezed my hand and left the soup with a promise to have coffee tomorrow. Tomorrow? The word felt different now. Not heavy with waiting, not shadowed by disappointment, but open. Tomorrow I would wake up without checking my phone. Tomorrow I would make breakfast for one, without wondering if he'd surprise me with a visit. Tomorrow I would live my life instead of waiting for someone else to validate it. I thought about David, probably home now, perhaps sitting at his own kitchen table trying to make sense of how he'd lost something he'd never valued. Julia beside him, calculating the financial impact rather than the emotional one. They'd survive. Of course. They had each other. Careers, their own carefully constructed life that had no room for an old woman until she'd had something to leave behind. But I wasn't bitter. Bitterness required energy I no longer wanted to waste. What I felt was lighter, as if I'd been carrying stones in my pockets for years and had finally remembered I could put them down. The letter I'd written to the McAllisters sat in my desk drawer, waiting for a future I hopefully wouldn't see for many years. But it comforted me, knowing that when the time came, my earthly possessions would go to people who understood that love wasn't just a word you said, but a verb you lived. I rose from the chair, bones creaking slightly, not from cold this time, just age. In the kitchen, I put the kettle on, chose the good china cup, the one I'd been saving for special occasions that never came. Tonight was special enough. Tonight I was choosing myself. As the water boiled, I thought about the trajectory of love, how we pour it into our children expecting it to circle back, only to learn that sometimes it flows in only one direction, how we mistake need for love, obligation for connection, how we can give everything and receive nothing and still survive. The kettle whistled, sharp and clear. I poured the water over chamomile leaves, watched them unfurl like tiny surrenders. The steam rose, carrying with it the ghost of every cup of tea I'd made alone, waiting for company that wouldn't come. But tonight's tea was different. Tonight I wasn't waiting for anyone. I carried my cup back to the window, settled into my chair. The snow had thickened, erasing footprints, covering the marks of David's car in the driveway. By morning, it would be as if he'd never been here at all. A clean slate, a fresh start. My reflection in the window showed a woman I was still learning to recognize. Not David's mother, just Margaret, a person complete in herself, not defined by who she'd raised or who had abandoned her, but by her own choices, her own worth. I raised my cup in a small toast to that woman in the glass. To warm houses, I whispered, to doors that lock, to love that flows both ways, to knowing when to stop. The furnace hummed its reliable song, the snow continued its quiet erasure, and I sat in my warm house, no longer freezing, no longer calling for help that wouldn't come. I had saved myself, and that was enough. More than enough, it was everything. In the morning, I would wake to a world remade by snow, clean and bright and full of possibility. But tonight, I would simply be a woman alone but not lonely, a mother released from mothering, a heart that had finally learned the difference between letting go and giving up. The clock chimed 10 p.m., and I smiled. Somewhere in this town, my son was learning what it felt like to be dressed warmly while standing out in the cold. The poetry of it wasn't lost on me, but I wouldn't open my door any more than he had opened his heart. Some lessons can only be learned through experience, and some warmth can only be found within yourself. I closed my eyes, listened to the silence that was no longer waiting to be filled, and felt, for the first time in years, complete. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across distances. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to hear more, and please share your thoughts. Sometimes the most powerful conversations happen in the space between the story's end and your own beginning.